I'd like to call the February 14th, 2013 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Wish everybody a happy Valentine's Day. And Ms. Scott, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knudsen?
Here.
Mr. Pons?
Here.
Mayor Holman?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here. Our first order of business today is council minutes for the meetings of January 7th and January 10th, 2013, the January 19th, 2013 City Council retreat, and the January 24th, 2013 City Council ARB joint meeting. Do I have any additions or corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I move the council approve the meeting minutes for the January 7th and January 10th, 2013 meetings, the January 19th, 2013 City Council retreat, and the January 24th, 2013 City Council joint ARB meeting as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye. We have no matters of special privilege or public hearings today, although I would like to note before we go on in the agenda, because we did not have a work session this Monday, and because there are several issues which the public might want to speak to, we will, at the appropriate time, particularly with the Stryker Center project and the new business request for a slope waiver, after presentations and before council take action, if anyone wishes to speak to those, we'll give you the opportunity to do so at that time. So that's a bit of a deviation from our normal procedures. But again, having not had the work session on Monday, we'd like to do that. And I've consulted with the other council members about that. Our next order of business is reports. The first of the monthly financial statements. Anything in particular to note, Jack?
Yes, sir. We thought that the Finance Director, Phil Serra, would give you a brief update on budget preparation for FY14.
Good afternoon, Mayor Holman, members of City Council. I'll briefly summarize the steps that we'll be taking over the next few months regarding the budget process. The dates that I'm going to refer to are included in the city's budget calendar. As we discussed at the January Council retreat, based on recent sales, residential real estate values look like they're finally swinging in the positive territory. So next month you'll see a public notice in the Virginia Gazette on March 9th. The notice is required if assessments, not including new construction, increase higher than 1% next year without a corresponding reduction in the tax rate, which would net the city the same amount of tax revenue. So you'll see that next month. The advertisement shows the details of the calculations that we use for the budget. We published this ad in the past, especially when real estate values were rising, but certainly not in the past 3 years. At the March 14th regular council meeting, the Williamsburg Regional Library will make its presentation to City Council. On March 25th, there will be a City Council work session highlighting outside agency budget requests, namely Colonial Williamsburg, the Alliance, the Arts Commission, and the Human Services Agency. On April 3rd, the proposed budget will be issued to City Council. The notice of public hearing on the budget will be published in the Gazette. This is the ad that recaps the proposed budget. And on Monday, April 8th, an overview of the budget in open forum will be held at the City Council work session. On April 11th, City Council's regular meeting will include a public hearing on the proposed budget, the tax levy, and the utility rates. And also, Williamsburg, James City County Public Schools will make their presentation at this meeting. On April 15th, City Council will have a budget work session. And finally, City Council is scheduled to adopt the budget on May 9th at the City Council meeting. The school superintendent's budget will be out next Tuesday, from what I'm understanding, February 19th. And also, the James City County budget is scheduled to be out March 22nd. So we'll be looking forward to getting the information presented in those documents. Certainly affect our budget and our, especially what Jack recommends in the proposed budget.
Any questions for Phil at this point? Yes, sir. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. And again, that's all on the city's website as well.
Keep everything updated. Yes, sir.
Super. Thanks. Anything else to point out in the monthly financial statements? Any questions? If not, the next are monthly department operating reports. Anything in particular to point out?
Just one thing I thought I'd point out. For the last couple of years, ever since we went to the iPads, we've been calculating the savings in printing costs each month, and that takes a little bit of time to figure out all of the pages and do that calculation. Last year, we had $3,071 in savings. This year so far, $2,243. And I think we've proven that we've more than paid for the iPads, and so we thought that we would just drop this metric from the list, but I didn't want to do it without your okay on it. Mrs. Walton would appreciate it, but she'd be happy to do whatever you would like.
That's fine.
I think that's fine with everybody. Thank you. The next order of business is city manager reports, and we have three. The first of those is the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority proposed resolution 1301.
Yes, sir. Again, on Monday, you went over this in detail, sitting as the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority. So now this is the other side of the coin for council to adopt the Memorandum of Understanding and Employment Agreement with the WRHA, and for council also to approve a resolution which puts the Triangle Building in the city's budget in economic development. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. And Chris, do you have anything to add to that? Okay.
Any questions? We did, sitting as a housing authority, go through this on Monday at some length. Any questions before we proceed?
No, I'd just like to say again, she's not here, but what a wonderful job Jody Miller did, being the interim director of the Housing Authority.
Yes, certainly, and it took a lot of time and effort, but it's paid off, and we really appreciate it. Chris, do we need to do these
Separately, please.
independent? Yeah, at each one. So the first action will be the proposed resolution 1301.
Mr. Mayor, I move council approve proposed resolution 13-01.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
And Mr. Foster.
Aye.
And next is the memorandum of understanding.
Sir.
Any questions before we proceed?
I'll move the approval of the memorandum of understanding.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
The next is the employment agreement. Any questions? Okay.
I'll move the approval of the employment agreement.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
And the final is the budget amendment. This is proposed resolution 1301, and this just clarifies from the city's budget the impacts of the decisions made with regard to the incorporating the housing authority.
Yes, sir. This is 1302.
1302, I'm sorry. 1302, yes. Okay?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
If
sir.
there are no questions, I'd be happy to move the council adopt proposed resolution 13-02, amending the fiscal year 13 city budget.
Okay.
Second.
Motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons. Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So that completes everything. The Housing Authority has taken its action on Monday. We've taken this action today, so really beginning March 1st, this moves forward. Okay, thank you. And again, I hope you'll convey council's thanks
Certainly
to
will. Thank you for saying so.
and I think there was a whole lot of help from other staff in this process as well, so thank you. It's been a very good process. The next order of business is a healthy eating, active living resolution, proposed resolution 1303.
Just by way of introduction, this issue was raised at the council's January retreat, and there's a model resolution, the Healthy Eating, Living, Active Living Towns and Cities campaign in Virginia, that Mr. Freiling brought to the council in his role now of chairing that newly formed or forming committee, in process committee on Citizens Committee on Community Wellness. So the staff took the model resolution and updated it and changed it to reflect Williamsburg specific conditions, both in terms of activities in the built environment and in employee wellness to affect a healthier community. So we're passing that resolution on to you, recommending that you adopt it.
Mr. Freiling, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I'd just like to share that Ms. Knudsen and I are both going to be working on this. We attended a program in Richmond in November, I believe it was. It seems like
Something like that.
It was a while ago. And with the HEAL group, Healthy Eating, Active Living. And as I understand it, if this is adopted, it will be we will be the first city in the state of Virginia to do this. I don't think there's a way I can overstate the potential problem or the current real problem of obesity in this country, and particularly as it affects children. And once people become ingrained in pattern of behaviors, changing those behaviors later in life is increasingly difficult. And the more that we can do as a community to support what's already happening in the schools through SHIP, not requiring that people undertake certain lifestyle changes, but giving them ample opportunity and access to programs and facilities and information that help them make the right choices. I think the more we can do that, the better we will serve this community now and into the future. When I shared this draft resolution with the coordinators of the HEAL program, immediately received an email back with a word of caution that they thought this was far too ambitious. And then I had to let them know, no, this is most of what we're already doing. The committee that we're going to establish is going to be looking at what are the other things that we as a community can support and do. So once they heard that, they were very pleased. I just leave it to my fellow council members to consider.
Great. Thank you. And thank you and Judy for the effort that have gone into this to this point. Scott, anything?
I've been informed that by voting for this, I have to follow it. So I'm definitely in favor. So.
It's good for our waistline.
Does that mean I shouldn't vote? As we got chocolate here?
Yeah. No, he's the only one who's still a child.
Well, again, I think this doesn't force anybody to do anything, but it raises awareness. And I think, just to echo what Vice Mayor Freiling had said, as a community, we all need to be alert to this lifestyle that's available, and because it reaps benefits, not just for an individual's health, but in healthcare costs and on down the line. So I think it's a great resolution.
Mr. Freiling said it very well, and I'm looking forward to working on the committee.
And again, I think Paul's point in particular about, this really is about providing education, not legislating or trying to control action, but trying to educate and provide nudges to help people live healthy lives and active lives.
Well, and there are huge potential benefits on the human side. And even if people can't wrap their arms around, and their hearts around that, just look at the cold, hard fiscal facts of the cost to this community with insurance, whether it's municipal or any employer. The costs continue to rise at an unsustainable rate, and it is and will continue to be a huge drain on our local, state, and national economy unless we can come together and do something. I don't know what impact we can have on the rest of the nation, so we might as well at least start here.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt the proposed Resolution 13-03.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons? Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
The next order of business is the Stryker Center Project PPEA proposal.
Yes, sir. By way of introduction, the Stryker Center, as set forth in the 2013 Comprehensive Plan and in the Council's 2014-15 Goals, Initiatives, and Outcomes, and in the Capital Improvement Program, is a joint venture between the city and the Williamsburg Regional Library. And I'll talk a little bit about the particulars of the project in a second, but what is particularly before you today is a PPEA proposal. And on Friday, February the 1st, I received a proposal for the development of Stryker Center pursuant to the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act of 2002, which was adopted by the City Council in its current form in 2007. The PPA process provides a means for building public facilities, and which the city has now used twice. Once we used it in the case of the development of the EOC and fire administration expansion to the fire station, and that was done in 2008. And earlier than that, the city constructed Trayburn Drive using the PPTA, Public-Private Transportation Act, which is the parallel to this on the transportation side. So we have had some experience and successful experience with this process. The unsolicited PPEA proposal was submitted by the team of Henderson, Inc. and Guernsey Tingle Architects, and the proposal is divided into two parts. There's a part one, and I have that here, which is public information that outlines all the essentials of their proposal. There's also a part two, which is financial information and other proprietary information that stays confidential for the city to evaluate, along with other proposals should we receive them, but is not made public at this point. Under the PPA process, once a proposal like this is received, the city needs to determine whether or not it wishes to accept the proposal for the purposes of publication and further consideration and analysis. And if the council does accept the proposal, accept receipt of the proposal, then it publishes a notice that for a period of not less than 45 days that the city would first intends to evaluate the proposal that was submitted, that it may negotiate an interim or a comprehensive agreement with the proposer, and that during that period the city will receive for simultaneous consideration other proposals that complying with the city's PPEA process. So if the council then, if it acted today to receive it, a notice would be published immediately after this meeting, and Julie Fairs, our purchasing agent, would publish that, and it would then open up that process of competition and evaluation. The next thing that would happen, we're proposing that we go at least until April, which that would bring us to April 12th would be the end of the submittal process for competing proposals. That well exceeds up to 45 days. And that on May the 2nd, if we followed that schedule at the earliest, city staff would need to come back to council with some form of recommendation. That could be to accept one or the other, or however many proposals receive on an interim basis for further negotiation, or it could be coming back at that time with a comprehensive agreement, all depending on what we receive and what the analysis shows in the coming months. So the earliest the council then could act would be May the 9th, your council meeting of that day. Other things that also have to happen during this time frame, and one obviously is the budget process and the approval of the capital improvement program, which would provide for the project and for its funding. And importantly, the city would need to develop with the partner in the program, which is the Williamsburg Regional Library, a memorandum of understanding to determine just what parties are going to pay for what and do what, both to develop the project and also to operate it. A lot of that base information on an MOU with the library has already been provided in the concept paper that we provided to you. John Moorman and I have had meetings on this, at least have sketched out the essential elements of that, but the final, we still have a good deal of work to do to put that in final form. Obviously, Mr. Moorman is here today to answer any questions on this from the library's perspective. Let me show you now, if I could read, if you could hit the slides for me, please. And I'm using the submittal that came in from Henderson and Guernsey Tingle just to then discuss what the project is and what it does. This shows the bird's eye view looking down from, you can see Boundary Street at the bottom of the slide, across from the library to the left-hand side. So this would be the footprint of the building. Read, next slide. And essentially what the proposal entails is a 14 plus 1,000 square foot building that would have 5 offices located in the lower left-hand corner. For the library director and 4 other staff members would move across the plaza into the building. It would provide for a 100-seat city council chamber to replace the room we're in now, and also with that a city council workroom that would be used by council, planning commission, ARB, and other city functions. It would also be available for community use along with the other meeting rooms in the building, rented by the library staff along with the other rooms. It would provide for video production, both for public meetings in the council chamber and in the workroom, for the meetings to be televised and video streamed. And it would provide 4 multi-purpose meeting rooms of various sizes for community events and other meetings managed by the library. And the entry foyer area would be an exhibit gallery to be used as pre-function space and by the library for its changing exhibits and its traveling exhibits. So that's essentially what the building does for us. John can speak to what happens with the freed up space in the library, because obviously this would replace the current meeting space in the library, as well as the office area that would be freed up for reuse in the existing library. So that's the project in a nutshell, and be happy to answer any questions. And again, Mr. Moorman can also speak to this as any questions you have of him.
So, let me just clarify. So if today you're asking us to receive this unsolicited proposal, that begins a process of evaluation by city staff and also provides time for competing proposals to come in. At the end of that time period, city council would, after staff's evaluation, you would come back to us, and city council could decide to go ahead with this proposal, go ahead with another, or could decide not to go forward with any.
That's correct.
Is that correct? So that's decision point, really, in May or June, depending upon, or
yes, sir. That's
when
correct.
this process.
You're not. The city is not committed to going forward at this point. You're continuing the process.
Okay. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, because we did not have a work session on Monday and people didn't have a chance to comment, that I'm going to come to council for questions, and following that, open it up for any public comments on this, and then come back to council for discussion and action. So any questions at this point for either the city manager or the library director?
I have a couple that I believe Mr. Tuttle would handle.
Okay.
Mr. Tuttle, you mentioned a 45-day, not less than 45-day period to consider this proposal and to await possible submittal of others. And we'd be, or the date was April 12th?
Right.
That would be the cutoff date for another proposal to be submitted.
Right.
What is and then May would be the time frame within which you would hope to turn around a recommendation to
The
council?
earliest, yes, sir.
So it could go later than May, because if there's, I would imagine it takes a while to put a proposal like this together.
Yes.
Starting from
it does.
scratch.
Right.
And then staff would need time to evaluate that. So if time became pressed, then there's no reason it couldn't go on to June.
Particularly if we receive a proposal, which we, on April the 12th,
Right.
and the window wasn't there to fully evaluate it, then we would suggest that be delayed. So we take the time we need.
And is there a generally accepted maximum time frame within which these proposals are considered valid? I mean, they don't last forever.
Well, that's true. The proposer can certainly put in their submittal to say this is good for this length of time. But there's nothing in the city's guidelines, as I recall, that says they must put a deadline on it.
And looking at, well, I have a couple of questions about this particular design. But for another proposal submitter, to what degree are they tied to the design as we see it? I mean, how does the city advertise the list of specifications that we would want to see in a project that we haven't put out for bid?
Right. The answer is there's a project concept that the city has adopted in the documents I referred to earlier. So what the city is trying to achieve is there. Then the proposer, though, can say, well, take an entirely different approach as to how they would meet those objectives. I would expect any proposer would certainly look at what this proposal was, and because, give you a little bit of history. The city has had planning money in the capital improvement program for the last 2 years. And when the municipal building was completed, we went back to the architect for the municipal building who had been working on the municipal center plan for some time, Guernsey Tingle, and we paid them simply on an hourly basis to begin working on the planning. So there has been work with city staff and with library staff to talk about this project and what it needed to accomplish. And so there was a period of time when the architect was merely working on a fee basis to assist that plan going forward. And a floor plan like this, although not identical to this, has been in prior CIPs and in the documents that I've mentioned to here. I don't think we put the floor plan in the goals, initiatives, objectives, but it was in the comprehensive plan, as I recall. So there was a planning process that led up to this, so that it's the city and the library have been back and forth to kind of get to this general idea. But there's nothing that says it has to be oriented in this direction or that direction, or that it has to be particularly this size, but that it contained this essential elements is certainly what has come through in the planning.
And if council decides to go forward in the future at some point with this or any other proposal, the design that we see, at least the exterior of the design, is still subject to Architectural Review Board approval.
Sure, yes,
So
sir.
it could end up looking significantly different than
Right.
it does.
In fact, I ought to clip through a few more slides if I could
Sure,
now.
sure.
I should have done that before I stopped speaking, but I forgot. This is an artist rendering looking down Boundary Street to the north of the facility that has been proposed. This would be the next slide, please, Reed. This would be the backside looking from Lafayette Street and Boundary. And then to give you just two artist renderings of the concept on the interior, this would be that foyer exhibit space to give you just a sense of what the architect is seeing at this point. And this would be the council chamber as they put it in their proposal.
And a couple of last questions. The relative seating capacity of the proposed space versus the current space that we have?
Yeah, we're not really sure how many this is supposed to seat, because the pews you can kind of, well, you count the rows and add, and so it gives us some more seating, not a tremendous amount more seating, but it can a lot more comfortable and accessible than what we currently have.
And the council work session space, just to get an idea
Sure.
of scale, about how big of a room are we looking at there?
That's a good question. Reed, if you could go back to the floor plan. It is a room, I want to say, similar to the third floor council, the third floor meeting space in the municipal building. So the idea was to have it large enough for the council or the planning commission to have a work session, still have members of the public there, but it would be limited seating for members of the public. So you might have, say, 20 seats for members of the public, so that if the meeting outgrew it, then you could migrate over to the larger room. But it would be designed to allow the board, whether it's the ARB or the council or the planning commission, to, in effect, sit around the table or in a U and be able to talk to one another very easily, but still have the public part of that conversation.
And one last question for now. You mentioned in your comments that this meeting space would be replacing the meeting space that's currently at the library,
Sure.
but it wouldn't be replacing all of the meeting space that's currently at the library.
Well, it would not be replacing the auditorium. The auditorium at the library, the Arts Center, would continue to operate as it does now. But the shell room and the other small meeting rooms there would be taken over by the library for teen services, which, and so the library would no longer have meeting rooms in it other than the one auditorium.
Thank you.
Scott?
I'm glad you clarified that point. We've got several calls about what today's proposal means. And, this is not yes or no day. That day will come down the road. But I'm kind of excited to see more information, more details come out of the woodwork. So.
Okay, great, thanks. Doug?
Thank you. I guess, obviously, this is an unsolicited proposal. But if we approve it today, we essentially are asking for other organizations and companies to submit a bid if they so choose. But we haven't, to Scott's point, we haven't decided yet whether or not this project is moving forward. It hasn't been approved in our CIP or in our budget. Is there any liability if we take this and put these contractors and architects through this exercise on our part to move forward in any capacity?
The answer is no. There's no liability. Any contractor coming in, architect, is doing this at risk. And so until the city enters into that agreement, it has there's nothing that can force us to enter into that agreement. So the answer is no.
Okay. You had mentioned the adopted concept document, not in those exact words.
Yes.
When did we do that? Was that?
About, I think initially in November, December timeframe is when that came together. Before that, what we had was the language that appeared in those other planning documents and the fairly detailed sheet in the CIP that we had. It had the floor plan, but then, so the concept paper is about a 3-page version of what was before a 1-page version.
And so it's kind of a working document. I mean, I don't remember voting saying that this is.
No, what you have voted on was the prior CIP, the goals, initiatives, and objectives, and the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Also, I read in some of the documents submitted by the architect and the engineer, the Henderson and Tingle, the Stryker feasibility study. When was that done, and have we seen a copy of that recently?
Sure. It was done back in 2002. Early on, it was, the big question was, should this building be rehabbed or replaced? And we particularly at that time had some issues with mold because we had a number of offices in this building. We had the housing authority and the voter registrar downstairs. We had the fire administration upstairs. We had ADA issues. There were a number of issues, and the question was to do an engineering evaluation to determine whether it is better to renovate and improve this building or start over. Mm-hmm. And so that's what that report did. It evaluated all of those systems and gave the city feedback on the status of this building.
And that was 10 years ago?
Yes, sir. Okay. Although I can tell you the conditions have not changed.
Well,
Or at least not approved.
No.
Lots of other environmental things that are not environmental in the sense of health, but a lot of other things have changed, So is it something that you put your hands on, we get a copy of? I'd like to see it.
Yes, sir. We'd be happy to send it to you.
Thank you. No other questions at the moment?
Okay. Judy?
Well, I'd just like to say that I think it is long past time to begin this process. And I'm very much in favor of beginning it. We are sitting in a building that is basically unused. It just sits here. We have a library that needs space. And I believe that if we don't do it now, it's going to be some time before we ever do it. So I think we need to start the process.
Thank you. Any further questions before I?
No, sir.
At this time, again, as I said, because we did not have a work session, if anyone wishes to come forward to speak to this, please do so at this point. Yeah. Elise, welcome.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Tuttle, I'm here as an individual, but as one of your city representatives on the school board. And I want to tell you about a couple of exciting things that have happened and I think might be enhanced by this project. Just recently, with Lafayette High School, a group of teachers and principals got together and formed a group called Guys Read. And it was really quite moving, the presentation. I don't know if you got to see it. They're taking a partnership with the library and putting books together like we do for our book club, where you can get a book bag. And then they have this system where the kids are reading the books, and they take them on these field trips. So they read a book about baseball and went down to the Norfolk Tides and sat in the bleachers and got these kids excited about reading. Boys who often neglect their reading as they get older. And the project, we're hoping, can be expanded to all the high schools, and we can and maybe the middle schools, but we can generate an excitement, the kind of partnership that I envisioned when we wrote our strategic plan about community involvement and all those kinds of things. So I'm just very excited about this. And I also, just listening to the radio this morning, heard that the construction costs they think they're going to be going up because the housing is coming back. So then you'll have more and more construction. So I would think this is an opportunity for us to take advantage of probably the last of the low construction costs. So I would encourage you to move forward on this. We're not locking in anything, but it sure sounds exciting. And by the way, we often use this building, and if you look at our television programs based on the comparison to the county, we all look kind of dead. And I want you to all know that I think we're all pretty much alive and pretty excited about what's happening in the schools. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Elise. And again, for those of you that don't know, Elise Emanuel is one of our representatives to the school board. So, does anybody else wish to speak to this? Please state your name and address.
I'm Bob Singley with RGS and Associates, and we're located across the street here. So you got to put my comments in context because they're probably somewhat subjective because I have a vested interest in what I look out my office to see what I see each day in there. But I'm not here to specifically comment about the design of the project or the layout itself, but more about the timing. And I would submit to you that the timing right now for you to go through this process is optimal. And that is, when we develop properties, we look at, do we have the tenants in hand to go ahead and fill up the retail space? We look at our development costs, which includes our soft cost as well as our construction cost. And then we look at our financing. You already have control of the tenants. You know who they're going to be. Your development cost as far as the construction costs are probably only going to rise in the future as inflation starts picking up. And the financing, you couldn't, in the 30-some years that I've been doing this, at least in the commercial sector, financing hasn't been better. And I probably would submit that your capabilities of being able to get bonds and stuff are very favorable as well. So I would urge you to go forward and go through this process, knowing the fact that you might not be locking into the ultimate design or even the construction in the future. But I think the other thing which is important, that it completes the vision that your predecessors on council had with regards to what they saw the Northington block to ultimately to look like. And with the proposal that you see in front of you today, it acts as a bookend looking across the commons area of the Northington block with the future Stryker building being located here and with the library on the other side. So I think your timing is right, and hopefully we'll give it favorable consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else wish to speak? If not, I'll come back to council for further discussion and action.
pass for the moment.
Scott. Doug?
Yeah, I don't, I guess I could pass it at this moment.
Does that mean it's going to come back?
Yeah.
I'm prepared to make a motion if everybody's ready.
Well, I'll throw in 2 cents.
Okay.
There's nothing not to like about this project. This building was fine in its day, and its day may very well have passed. The enhanced meeting space, the technological aspects, the ability to televise work sessions in a more intimate space, as we all know, when we have our budget conversations and we want the people making the presentations to feel part of a conversation, it is important to have that in a different type of setting, and we don't have a way to do that now and still get the public involved through the television broadcast. So that's important. The accessibility issue is major. I mean, this building is, certainly the upstairs is not at all accessible, but the building itself is really limited. And we will need to do something at some point. When you add the library component into it, it becomes more compelling, because we're not just talking about a council meeting chamber, a council meeting space, or a place where city council people hang out in their spare time. We're talking about a real community asset, something that's going to help people of all walks of life, all demographic components, and it brings people downtown. And that's exactly what we want to happen. We want more people coming downtown for the types of activities that hopefully spin off some additional revenue through economic development, but also create that sense of place that defines what we mean when we say community. And there's not a better partner that I can imagine than the library. The one question that still lingers in my mind, though, is the urgency of the project. And Mr. Singley makes a good point about the financing costs. They will only go up with time. No one knows when, but they can't go any farther down, I don't think. Can they, Mr. Mayor?
I don't think so.
Just lean on you as the economist. But I guess where I'm a little bit disappointed in this is that I don't feel as though we've had an adequate opportunity to evaluate what are the other possible projects that we could be doing to likewise enhance the community that might be compared against this from the standpoint of what they would bring to the city and the degree of urgency that they would involve, and whether or not these other projects might spin off more revenue that would help us do a project like this later on down the road, or hopefully not too long, but sometime in the future. But we haven't had those conversations. We've started them at times, but we haven't really followed through. And I think that if we accept or receive this unsolicited bid, we are sending a signal to the broader community that we're serious about this, or at least we ought to be, because to do otherwise, while it may be perfectly legal, it doesn't seem completely responsible. And it doesn't seem completely fair to those other people who might devote a lot of time, energy, and money to generating a proposal. So we do need to think very carefully about this. I know we always have that opt-out later on, but this is a significant decision. If we decide to receive this, I just ask my colleagues that we please have this other conversation about what are the other infrastructure needs that we have, particularly in the downtown area, moving towards Midtown, that we might be able to undertake that in the long term would provide a different level of vitality to this community, and particularly on the economic side, because as we know, pressures are going to continue to grow, and we need to be able to set the city on the path to meet those challenges in the future long after we're off the council.
I'll take that comment a step further. What I like about starting this process today, and what Paul just said about what this process means and this project means in a larger scale, looking forward to that conversation with you four, but also hearing more from the community. I'm starting to get a steady trickle of comments on this specific project. But, people also need to be thinking, in this right time, what else? What are your other priorities? So this is an opportunity for a holistic look.
And I think that's exactly the point. I mean, this has been This concept has been around for years. We've had various discussions, but there's nothing like a specific, we're going to spend money at such and such a time to focus attention and say, is this the right thing to do? So it seems to me this really does take that step and really says, okay, you've got this time period to evaluate, you've got this time period to bring forth alternatives, evaluate them in light of this, and decide what's the best way to go. And that does help to focus attention.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that, and my apprehension has nothing to do with the concept of the project. There's no question in my mind, the way that the project's been laid out could be very successful. Partnering with the library, the financing, the overall aesthetics of what so far has been presented, I think, would be an improvement here, no doubt. My mind goes back to, again, as has been said, is the timing of this versus what other options are available to the city, to the community, that may have a greater economic impact, which could then make this type of project easier to finance. And there's lots of suggestions abound, but that's part of this the community conversation that Councilman Foster just talked about. We want to be able to hear these options, these considerations, and then it's important that we start to think, of that 50-year vision. What other projects can we put in place in our CIP, in our annual budgets, to make other projects come to fruition? The other thing that kind of eats at me a little bit is, this is a lot of bricks and mortar here, and I'm not wholly convinced that some of the challenges that this building faces can't be fixed with some renovations at a substantially less cost than tearing it down and rebuilding it, which would then free up some other money to do some other projects. Renovating this building could potentially still provide the space that the library needs in terms of office, free up space in the library so that they can do all the programming that they've been thinking about and that they've expressed could happen with this type of move. I think those options are still there, and I haven't seen them. And so that's pretty much why I'm still a little apprehensive.
I think that unless we start something right now, there won't be anything to react to. I agree that people need to react, people need to talk about projects. I haven't seen any other big projects. We've done a lot of talking about it, but I haven't seen anything concrete. This is very concrete, and as we've discussed in the past, we can borrow the money and still have other money in reserve, which we have now, for a project that we might think of that might come along, or that we might get a proposal from somebody in the community. So far, we haven't got that proposal. We've got this. It starts what we are all talking about and what we all want, which is making downtown more attractive. I had a conversation with some people from the gallery who are very excited about the idea of all of the renovation downtown, or in this general area. And I think we need to be part of that conversation, and starting this is the way we're part of that conversation.
And I think also as part of that, you need to think about what does this do for downtown vitality? What does this do for creating a center of activity, a cultural center, an intellectual center for the city, close to Merchant Square, that creates the incentives to fill in between those and to spread out from there? And will other projects, which we have to look at and have to be brought forward, will they do that same type of thing? Will they have the same type of multiplier effects that this might have? So I think this time period to evaluate this is not only an evaluation of this proposal that's been put before us, this unsolicited proposal, but it's also a time for council and the community to start thinking about those broader questions and what is the best first step as we start moving forward to ensure that downtown Williamsburg remains the center of this community, the center of activity of this community, and the center of economic activity for the city.
But, and I'm just going to Paul.
May I ask Mr. Tuttle a question?
Yeah.
Mr. Tuttle, taking Mr. Pond's point or question about the feasibility of adapting this building as opposed to tearing down and rebuilding, my limited experience in that field suggests that it can be complicated and sometimes remarkably expensive for what you get. But I still take his point that maybe it would be less expensive. The question is, in the scope of work that we put out for any competing proposals that might want to be submitted, would they state that our desire is to demolish this building and build a new, or is that left open?
It doesn't state either way. It simply says this is the city's objective. And so someone could come in and say, you know, I think I could work with what you've got, and this is what I would do with that building.
If they felt like their bid could be as competitive or competitive
Right.
with the one that's already
It's not
signed.
really, it's
And they
not a
don't-
bid, it is a proposal
Right,
rather
right,
than a
right,
bid.
correct.
And they could, yes, certainly could do that.
Okay.
Thank you. The other point sits in the back of my mind, it's not long ago in history, the library was struggling for funds to stay open all the time. There were days, I recall, they were being closed on Fridays because there was, a budget shortfall. This expansion of library is really ultimately going to come back to the taxpayers to make sure that it's funded so that it can do what it's designed to do, and that's to be open. And so, this, using your term as a multiplier, this has a multiplying effect in terms of expenses on, to the partnership of the Williamsburg Regional Library. And so that's a concern of mine as well, because we all may not be in a position to fund the library as we are today.
I would just like to point out that the Library Foundation has been created since the problems the library had, and has a lot of support in the community, and they are pledged to help with this process. Mr. Mayor?
Any further discussions, comments? I'll take.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that City Council accept receipt of the proposal from Henderson Incorporated and Guernsey Tingle Architects for the design and construction of the Stryker Center project for purposes of evaluation, and invite additional proposals under the process set forth in the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Thank you all. We are beginning a several-month interesting process, I believe. Our next order of business is city attorney reports.
Periodically, City Council adopts code supplements for the year. That's the ordinance that's in front of the council. It simply updates the electronic city code for the year 2012.
Any questions? So this is really housekeeping.
It is.
Right? Okay. Take a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I approve adoption of City Code Supplement Number 25, proposed ordinance number 13-01.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
We have no unfinished business. That brings us to new business, and first is planning report, which is a request of Dennis Kaiser for a slope waiver at 201 Burns Lane, and this is SPR 13-002. And once again, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, because we didn't have a work session earlier, we will do staff report at time for questions from council, and then open the floor for any public comments if anyone wishes to comment, and then come back to the council for discussion and action. Mr. Rhodes, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Kaiser has requested a waiver of the zoning ordinance to allow grading on slopes in excess of 30%. He proposes constructing a dwelling at 201 Burns Lane. Less than 700 square feet of steep slopes would be impacted by the proposed development. And the area with the steep slopes that would be impacted is in red along the edge of Powell Lane. This is obviously Burns Lane here, the intersection of the two roads. Here's a photo from Burns Lane looking down towards the back of the lot. And also a photo in the opposite direction looking from the back of the lot up towards Burns Lane. And you can see a car parked along Powell Street at the top of the slope. The area would require grading in order to provide a driveway, normal construction activity, and permanent drainage control. And I would note that just over 100 square feet of impervious surface would be added to the steep slope, and that's at this area right here where there's a proposed driveway off of Powell Lane. So about 100 square feet of impervious area would be added to the steep slopes. As you can tell, the entire house is well outside the area that's of the steep slopes. This is an existing lot of record. The parcel was created in 1983 and met all city ordinance requirements in effect at that time. Development restrictions on steep slopes were adopted in 1991. A house can be built on the lot if it meets all zoning requirements. A new single-family house requires a minor site plan. A minor site plan is approved by the zoning administrator if all zoning requirements are met. And I would note that the proposal meets all zoning setback requirements and all on-site parking requirements. The lot is located in an architectural preservation district, which requires that the design of the house be approved by the Architectural Review Board. A design has been submitted to the Architectural Review Board, and the case is under review. The issue before the City Council today is whether or not to grant a waiver to allow this disturbance of 30% slopes on this lot. The minor site plan is approved by the zoning administrator upon satisfying the zoning requirements and stormwater requirements, which are reviewed by the city's engineer. The Plan Commission considered this request at the January 16 meeting and recommended to City Council that the slope waiver be approved. I'd be glad to take any questions that City Council has, and Mr. Kaiser is also here in attendance if you have any questions of the applicant.
Let me turn to council for any questions.
I have two questions, Mr. Rhodes, but before I ask those, could we just ask the city attorney to talk a little bit about why this slope waiver is necessary and what is the context of the conversation that we should be having related to it?
Well, the slope waiver, these have generally been granted by the Planning Commission without City Council involvement as a result of the city code. Last year, the Virginia Supreme Court came down with a decision that said that the Planning Commission does not have the legislative authority to grant slope waivers. And therefore, the only entity in the city that has the authority to ultimately grant the slope waiver at this point is the City Council. We were hoping there would be a fix this year at the General Assembly, and that would be added to the code to allow the Planning Commission to continue to consider these. That does not appear to be the case, and so we will need to make a change in the zoning ordinance. But for the time being, that's why City Council is reviewing this today and making a decision on it instead of the Planning Commission, although the Planning Commission is certainly able to give Council a recommendation and has done that. So what is in front of the City Council today is simply the slope waiver. The applicant has the right to construct a house on this lot if it meets all the setbacks, which it does. What council is looking at is whether or not, as the applicant has requested, they are going to allow the applicant to encroach into the slope for the purposes of drainage and construction and for the purposes of constructing the driveway in the back. It is not whether or not he is allowed to build on the lot. It is simply a question of what is he going to be allowed to do with the slopes.
This might be a difficult question for you to answer, but what are what grounds would we have for denying the slope waiver?
The waivers can be granted according to the city code because of unusual size, topography, or shape of the property, the location of the property, or unusual conditions of the property. My understanding is that the slope was created in the construction of the road. That would result in significant degradation of the site or of adjacent properties. So there's a question of erosion. What would happen if the applicant built on the lot when the drainage issue is not able to be resolved satisfactorily because the slope waivers are not granted? Council needs to determine whether granting the waiver is detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare or not, necessary to the orderly development of the area or sound engineering practice, or if there's any detriment to the properties located within the project impact area within those confines. So that's what council, the criteria that council should look at in making its determination.
And by detriment, it means a physical detriment, not an aesthetic detriment.
Something that involves the health, safety, and welfare orderly development of the area.
Thank you. Now may I ask Mr. Rhodes my
Yes.
question? Mr. Rhodes, how is the slope simply disturbed because the ground is disturbed, or is there a remediation necessary where more dirt is brought in to create a more gentle, longer slope? How?
That is correct. The applicant proposes to grade the area to have a more gradual slope. These are the proposed topography once the site is graded. So it is more gradual. It would get water away from the building, which is a building code requirement, that you have positive drainage away from the building at least 10 feet. Did I answer your question?
And then
sir?
somehow has to be channeled around. I mean, okay.
As far as the drainage?
Yes.
Yes, they show the drainage going on both sides of the house, being graded in such a way that it will go away from the building and towards the back of the lot. We do not have a drainage stormwater plan to show exactly how this would be handled beyond the house. The applicant has talked about possibly piping it into the city's stormwater system here, which runs along Powell Street, which he would need to actually go in the steep slope in order to tie into that system.
Thank you.
So just to be clear from that map, it's more, the driveway crosses the slope, and there'll be grading to the east of the house in that slope area. And those are the only 2 points of impact.
It would be graded, pretty much the entire front of this lot would be graded, and this, which is shown in red, is the area that exceeds 30%.
Gotcha.
And yes, it would be graded to have positive drainage along that side of the house and also to provide access for that driveway.
And this grade was created by fill when the road...
Can't say for certain. It certainly appears that way, the way the slope adjoins Powell Street, but I have no documentation that that was created with the road. It stands to reason.
Gotcha.
So, is there, Ms. Sheldon suggested that there has to, are there runoff issues for other properties or what have you? So if this grading's done and what do you see as potential problems with other properties or with stormwater drainage, etc.?
Well, stormwater drainage would have to be addressed before we approve the minor site plan.
So that's going to be addressed when you look at the site plan?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that is one option, is to pipe into the existing system. The Public Works Director has looked at that, and that is a possibility.
Okay. Doug?
I don't have any questions.
Judy?
I had a couple of things. Rodney, when I was on the BZA, we did a number of these in Port Ann, and we kept approving them because and I was told it was because Port Ann was a planned unit development that was developed before the ordinances came along. Why? This is not a planned unit development. This is just a lot, right? Am I hearing that every lot in the city can violate these ordinances and we have to approve the waivers?
Variances go before the Board of Zoning Appeals, so I'm not sure those requests were. They may have been slightly different. They shouldn't have been slope waivers.
They were slopes that violated the Chesapeake Bay Act.
Chesapeake Bay, it was an encroachment into the
In the
100-foot
Chesapeake Bay.
resource protection area.
Yeah.
And similar to Port Ann, this lot was created prior to those zoning
Right.
changes, I believe.
But that was a planned unit development, and this is just a lot.
Any lot of record that's legally existing would certainly have the same criteria and have the same threshold to meet.
So except for Quarter Path, which is essentially undeveloped, there's nothing we can do for this kind of lot request. All these lots were platted before we changed it.
Yes. It met all zoning requirements back in '83, I believe, when it was created. So it is a legally existing lot.
Okay. The second question, and I'd like to refer to the second half of I keep losing this, the waiver thing. And it talks about the granting of the waiver is not detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. There are, I believe you told me, 6 parking places on Powell. If this driveway goes in, it's going to take out 2 parking places. There is at least one house on that section of Powell that has no on-site parking at the house. So they have to use Powell to park. There are 2 other houses on that side of Powell that use that street for parking. Isn't this detrimental to the safety of those people?
As far as on-street parking, that is not something that is addressed under a minor site plan. It is not a issue that we would be looking at.
Even if one of the houses doesn't have any parking and has to use the street?
That house is non-conforming if it doesn't have 2 off-street parking spaces.
And what, will it have to build parking spaces if this house goes in? If this driveway goes in, rather?
The development of this lot would not require any other lots to create parking spaces or conform in any way. There's about 200 feet, I believe, of road frontage here along Powell Street. And you are correct that putting a driveway in here would take up probably 2 of those spaces.
2 of them, right? So in fact, it is going to be detrimental to the safety of the other people who live on that street, I would argue. Okay, that, you don't have to decide that. That's all I have for questions.
Okay. Any further questions at this point?
No.
Thank you, Rodney. At this point, if anyone wishes to speak to this, please do so. If you wish to speak, please come forward, state your name and address. And again, we typically limit comments to 3 minutes. So thank you. Linda, welcome.
Linda Lane Hamilton, 675 Powell Street, the house without parking. Both the city engineer and another contractor have told us and the developer that we will not be able to park on our street should this driveway go in, and that we will have to spend additional thousands and perhaps more than that to create a driveway that the city may allow us to create on the city easement, because we can't do it on our own property because we live on such a steep hill. So whatever happens, either we are going to be parking further up Powell Street or across Burns Lane on the other end of Powell Street, or we're going to be having to spend money out of our own pocket to create a driveway. To me, the problem is not the house at the top of the hill. The problem is the driveway going into Powell Street, because there are 2 parking spaces in the driveway going onto Burns Lane. And the driveway going onto Powell Street at this point does not have a garage. It's just a driveway that ends with a future garage. And because of that driveway, all of this remediation for the slope is is causing the remediation for the slope. Without that driveway, slope remediation would not be necessary. And so that's my concern. The other concern, and I'm sure you're referring to what I set out today about aesthetics, but the lot is significant in the neighborhood, and it contains some old cedars across the top and a number of unique plantings down the side, all of which are going to have to be removed to do this kind of slope remediation, because the root balls will be covered and the trees can't live. And so essentially, although I'm sure the builder will put in trees in the future. We are one of those neighborhoods with huge canopies, and to have one lot that has nothing, especially such a pivotal lot at the beginning of Burns Lane, makes it difficult. So that's my perspective, and I've been to every meeting, and I know the train of government moves on and the train of development, but I feel like I have to say what I say in order to live with myself and to try to speak for the neighborhood so that they can be satisfied with the end result. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
My name's Dennis Kaiser. I live on 123 Matoka. I'm the builder of the property. The seller has an agent who's also here if you have any questions for the seller's agent. The disturbance of the slope, right now all of the drainage goes to the rear of the property. So the advantage of disturbing the slope would make it possible for me to be able to pipe drainage over to Powell Lane and actually reduce the quantity of drainage, stormwater drainage that goes to the back. Now would be able to be diverted into the pipes, the city drainage system. That's one advantage of disturbing the slope. The second, the driveway where it is, I met out at the site the other day with the city engineer and from Dan's office, and there are other options that are available in reference to parking for Mrs. Hamilton. And so I'm asking to be able to disturb the slope to improve the drainage, and that's basically the gist of it. So if there's any questions for me in reference to construction, I'm here.
Thank you. Any further? Carol, would you?
I'm Carol Sherman, and I live at 334 Burns Lane since 1974, so have seen a few changes. And in following up on Mr. Pond's very useful word, I am apprehensive. I don't feel that whatever decision is made relative to this request is going to be made in isolation, because there are a number of other properties on the lane that are clearly going to be coming up for sale within the next few years, and there may be quite an avalanche of waiver requests. And that really does have me apprehensive. Also, to follow up on what Mrs. Shilton said, orderly development, I think, is a real concern for any of us who've lived in a neighborhood for a long, long time. I don't think are reactionary, but we do want what happens next to be in keeping with the tradition. Williamsburg likes that, and I'd really like to advocate serious reservations about this particular request. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone else wish to speak?
I'm Joe Roundtree. I live at 701 Powell. We faced the lot in question, and you did say something about aesthetics, but I think the neighbors are very concerned that there will be no trees on that lot, that all of that growth will be removed, and it will be quite a different approach to Burns Lane once that's done. Whether small trees are put in later by the developer or not, we think it will significantly change the character of the neighborhood as you go into it.
Thank you, Joe.
My name is Andrea Serena. I'm with William E. Wood, and I represent the sellers of the lot. I wasn't really prepared to say anything today, but as I listen to everybody, it strikes me that
this lot has been here since 1983. My sellers and the former owners have been taxed on this as if it's a buildable lot. The Greenbaums maintain this lot almost like a little neighborhood park. It's got a lovely gazebo on it. It has the trees. They sold the house next door that's at 203, and the lot went on the market, and the lot was on the market for 6 months. And while I appreciate that everybody wants to keep their neighborhood the way it is, no one got together and said, hey, look, let's buy this lot and let's keep it as a neighborhood park. I think that my sellers, the Greenbaums, have a right to sell the lot. It's a buildable lot. It was divided off as a buildable lot. They've been paying taxes on it as if it's a buildable lot. And when you look at the photos of this 40% slope, you know, they are sort of taken from a down angle. When you're standing there, it doesn't read the same. And as they were pointing out, the road is higher. So odds are, through years of them never moving any of the dirt around, this slope has occurred. I don't even know that it's naturally there. The water automatically flows down towards Mrs. Hamilton's house anyway. Even if you didn't allow the house to be built, the water is still going to flow down there. And it's a public road. So, you know, my sellers just want to be able to sell a lot that when they bought it, they were told it was a buildable lot, and that's what they want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
I'm John Strong at 321 Burns Lane, and part of, I guess, what I would be sort of trying to think through here would be whether, since there's no garage plan for construction, and a lot of the waiver project here involves a driveway that is to a garage that doesn't exist and is not part of the plans, yet there's another driveway coming off of Burns Lane. There's already sufficient off-street parking with the front driveway. So if that part of the project were rethought, then a lot of these issues would be not as significant, I think. And so the question I would ask is whether we could have a rethinking of this project to mitigate some of the development some of the slope project here that's a function of a driveway to a garage that doesn't exist.
Thank you, John. Any other comment? If not, I'll come back to council for questions and discussions. And I guess, Christine, if this waiver were not granted, that does not change the buildability of the lot? Is that correct? Or is this integral to the buildability of the lot?
I can't answer that question because I'm not an engineer. City Council needs to be careful not to create a situation in which the lot does become an unbuildable lot. So I just caution you in moving forward with the slope waiver to that.
Questions, comments?
One question for Mr. Rhodes, if he wouldn't mind coming back up. We have driveways coming into the lot from two different streets?
That is correct. That there is a one-car parking space off of Burns Lane. This is about 12 feet wide, about 18, 20 feet deep. And then a driveway off of Powell Lane that would handle 2 cars, so it is 18 feet wide.
And there's no, obviously, if it's in this site plan and you agreed with the plan, then there's no limitation on the access through 2 different public streets from a single property.
We looked at this. I looked at this along with the Public Works Director. The original proposal showed a 3rd entrance off of Powell that would loop out to Burns here. And in addition to some concerns about having 3, driveways to one house, there's also a parking space here that's on an easement on this lot, but it serves the adjoining lot. And when I did the front yard calculations as far as parking, it exceeded our 30% threshold for the front yard. Therefore, Mr. Kaiser came back with this proposal to just have a one-car space here and then 2 in the back. The zoning ordinance requires 2 off-street parking spaces for a single-family dwelling.
Okay.
So it meets that requirement. Oops.
You know, this is, it's unfortunate, because if this house had been built back in 1985, 87, none of these issues would exist. The trees would have been planted then. They'd be mature now. It would fit in, assumingly nicely, with the community. But it's because it's one of the latter lots that's developed in the neighborhood. And having been a former resident of Port Ann, I'm very familiar with a lot of the issues that happen there when people own 2 lots because they wanted to preserve some green space next to their house. At some point, they decided they didn't want to continue to pay the additional homeowners association fee on top of the taxes. They'd sell the lot, and then all of a sudden there's oh no, there's a house going in there. And in most cases, all of the trees had to come off, for maybe not all, but 75 to 80% of the trees had to come off the property. And it was disconcerting to the neighbors. We did not have any instances where, with the same on-street parking dilemma that we have on this street. But the real problem here is if we, based upon what Ms. Shelton has told us, if we don't grant the waiver, and if we do, I mean, we're sending a signal that this is going to be difficult to build on. And I don't know at what point that constitutes a taking of some property right, but that's a really serious matter that I don't think, I know I'm not prepared to engage in, because as the last speaker pointed out, I mean, this has been, it's been owned under the understanding that it was a buildable lot. The taxes, it's been assessed as a buildable lot. The taxes have been paid on it for 30-some years now, and the owner just wants the ability to sell it. I think it's a very difficult thing not to approve.
Further, I think the discussions of, what might happen to the tree cover and what have you really aren't germane to the slope waiver question. They are other questions, unless you define welfare very broadly. And can you give us any indication, Ms. Sheldon, about the way that welfare has been considered in courts?
Not as to trees and slope waivers specifically, no. That would be indeed reading a slope waiver provision extremely broadly. We do have provisions in the city code regarding trees, which may or may not be applicable to this particular lot. I would defer to Mr. Rhodes on that. Right. But it certainly would be a stretch.
It seems to me that the issues would come from if the construction, this proposed construction was creating an excessive drainage issue that was going to undermine another property, then that would be a problem. But I don't think it ever would have gotten to this point if that was the case, because Mr. Rhodes would have worked with the applicant and explained that would need to be corrected. But one thing this does do is help with some of the drainage that's currently there and divert it into the city system to get it off the street, off the neighboring properties. So I just want to point that out.
I guess your answer to Clyde's question is the answer to my question, but, does that driveway meet the threshold impact for, because it does have a larger effect and may ultimately have an effect on their neighbors in a monetary sense?
City Council could approve the slope waivers as to drainage and construction and not as to the driveway. I would again need to defer to Mr. Rhodes if there was a way to configure the house on the lot that allowed a driveway in a different location or allowed the expansion of the driveway in the front, then that would not prohibit building on the lot in that instance. But that would be a question for Mr. Rhodes to answer. But council could adopt part of the requested waivers for construction and drainage, but not for the driveway.
this is another question about, as I understand from Mr. Rhodes, part of the problem with the driveway coming off of Burns Lane is that it runs into the question of a proportion of parking to yard in under our zoning ordinances. If someone wanted to build a larger parking area in that front, is there a process to appeal for a waiver of that 30%?
Need to request a variance.
Rodney, you may be able to answer that.
I'll try to answer that.
Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes. If this space was expanded to handle 2 cars, it would need to be 18 feet wide. And
rather than the 12 it is now.
That is correct. And I've done some rough calculations adding in this driveway, which is on this lot, but serves the adjoining property through this easement, adding that to a parking space that's 18 feet wide. It would also have to be at least 18 feet deep. You're around 27% of your front yard would be devoted to parking. And when Public Works looked at this, they requested, I think, 18 feet that this driveway be from the intersection. So if it was expanded, it'd have to be expanded towards the middle or towards the front of the house.
But if the individual wanted to do that and it violates that percentage, do they have an appeal process for that?
Yes, sir.
And
The second part of your
is
question, that is a variance, and that would go before the Board of Zoning
So they
Appeals.
could appeal for a variance and do it that way. So if we didn't approve the driveway coming off of Powell, I've always called it Powell Street, Powell Lane, you could still go through a design that had the parking off of Burns Lane, but that would require an appeal for a zoning ordinance to do that.
If it exceeded that 30% threshold, yes, sir.
And let me caution council that there are standards, legal standards for proving hardship and the degree of hardship when you're dealing with variances. So it's not an automatic, you request a variance from the BZA and you get a variance from the BZA.
If I could make a slight correction, that's a special exception process through the BZA, not a variance.
Okay.
So it's not the same standards.
Okay.
I misspoke on that.
So a special exception, and that has a lower standard to meet than a variance.
That is correct.
Okay. That's helpful.
Can I ask a
Yeah. This is,
Rodney,
we're inventing as we go
Yes,
here,
we are.
guys.
My recollection is that when the Greenbaum house was sold, and it was sold separately from the lot, they found that circular driveway encroached onto the lot, right?
That's correct.
I thought that the people who bought the house then had to buy that sliver of land that the driveway was on.
They did not buy that land, but they bought an easement over that land. Or acquired, I should say, they acquired an easement.
They did not buy the easement.
Excuse, if you'd come up to, because you know about this may help us. This is not normal procedure, but if you would.
I was part of the sale. They did not buy the easement. The easement was granted to them, and I can't remember who the attorney was. Sheldon Frank and Bill Miller wrote the easement up when we found out that the gravel driveway sat on Lot 1.
Okay.
There was no additional monies that passed hands. Okay. The reason it goes back further is because of the slope behind the house.
Okay.
The people on Lot 1 are not given the ability to use that driveway. The use of the driveway is with the second lot.
Yes, okay. So that was conveyed at the time the property was purchased?
Correct.
Okay,
So Mr. Kaiser and 201 will never be able to use that driveway.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yet, Mr. Rhodes, that still counts against their driveway allocation toward front yard?
Yes, sir, it does.
Yeah. Okay. Judy, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Again, I think we're getting off of the waiver for the slope, but to add to getting off, I think the driveways will enhance parking. I mean, imagine a family of four, you know, mom, dad, 2 teenage drivers, 4 cars. You know, getting cars off the street, I think, is going to help that little area versus not having the driveways, because those cars are going to be there one way or the other. So anyways, it's an unfortunate circumstance. There's, as Vice Mayor Freiling says, you know, people get used to seeing things. But things change, and in this case, the owner of this property does have the right to develop and go through this process. And others have the right, the opportunity to go by and preserve if that was the case. That doesn't diminish the hardship that the Hamiltons or other neighbors are going to feel from this.
And as I understand from Ms. Shelton, we really have to think about this slope waiver, and does it have the detrimental environmental, health, safety impacts, and that's all we can consider.
Not aesthetic.
Yeah.
No matter what we do, it'll still be conflated with aesthetics. So that's why this is particularly hard. You know, very limited scope of review here, and yes, it will have, you know, an indirect impact on those things, but this is, I wish we could appease both parties here, but I'm afraid that's not going to happen.
That's what you get the big bucks for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just as an aside, I'd like to point out that there are approximately 7 cars parked in that circular driveway on a daily basis, so that's just not much to do with that, but just as an aside. I still think that if you look at Part 2, granting of this waiver is in fact detrimental to public safety in the neighborhood because of the parking. And I think we should consider that.
Any further comments, discussion? I'll take a motion for action.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the waiver to impact slopes greater than 30%. Where's the number here?
SPR 13-002.
Yeah, for SPR 13-002.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Newton?
No.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Thank you all for participating. And again, that's okay. Next order of business, under new business, we have, as a result of much of the discussion that has occurred since we've gotten the unsolicited proposal about the Stryker building, I've had individual conversations with council members, and there seems to be and this goes back to our earlier discussion about questions about the whole, what do we see as downtown vitality and directions for downtown. And I think as a result of that, we'd like to ask staff to look at, as we move forward with the CIP process, and I often slip into being an economist and call it a CPI, but it's not, it's a CIP process, that if we could have some discussions and thinking from staff about sort of what might be some steps that we take as we move forward in thinking about sort of the downtown area, downtown vitality, and what some roles that the city might play as we move forward there. And I think one of the things we might start with is thinking about whether it might be useful to bring someone in to help us think about that whole downtown area and look at sort of options as we go forward. And I know other council members have thought about this as deeply and as much as I have, and any further thoughts that you can help direct staff would be useful.
No, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think in light of all this discussion, lots of unique ideas have come up, but lots of similarities in thinking amongst members of council, members of the Planning Commission, members of the EDA, and just members of the general public about just overall, not redevelopment, but, how do we look at the next step for the city center area? What opportunities exist and how do we explore them? And so I think your suggestion of bringing somebody in, that urban designer type consultant, would be helpful to identify that next project, because nothing gets into the CIP or it can't get budgeted until we identify what it is. So I thank you for bringing that up.
And I think, again, given that we've just completed a strategic plan from the EDA, that we've just completed a comprehensive plan, and those two documents both discuss this issue, that this might be a useful time to do that.
Okay, we'll bring back something for you to look at.
And any further comments?
This process has really made me realize, there's a maintenance portion of a capital improvement plan where it's just, phasing things out, revitalizing the fleet.
Buying new fire trucks, buying new police cars.
Right. There's also a vision part of the comprehensive plan, and I think what this discussion has facilitated is kind of not absolutely clear, but we know which direction we're headed, and or we want to be headed. So I think that process would be particularly beneficial at this juncture.
Any further?
Yeah, I want to make one other comment. I don't want to give anybody the impression that we're just looking to spend money.
Right.
That is certainly not what we're talking about here. We recognize there's some things that we need to do, and there's some things we should do to help keep the city vibrant and successful in ways that help keep the individual property taxes lower. And that's by building up the economic base of the business community, and not to the extent that we're doing this just for the development for the sake of development. It's really about bringing in the right type of businesses that are going to complement what's already here and add to the quality of life for the residents and for all the visitors who come here each year and spend significant amounts of money, which also help keep our tax rates low. So it's about how do we invest that money in the right way to encourage and prompt additional commercial activity that will support the lifestyle of the residents of the city. And so that's a distinction from we're just looking for ways for the city manager to help us spend money. I'm not saying you were suggesting that.
No. And I think, too, we have to keep in mind that the role of the city is also providing services to our citizens and our constituencies. And so we're balancing sort of how do we continue to provide the highest quality services in a wide range of areas, while also thinking about economic development. At times those two coincide, at times they don't. But so we have to continually balance sort of what are we doing for the provision and high quality of continued high quality of city services, and what are we doing for economic development. Hopefully those two can be one and the same, but they're not always going to be. So thinking about that tension as well as I think is important. Okay.
Two other points, if I may, since we've gone back to the striker. We haven't also determined, whether it's going forward, but how it's going to be paid for, whether that's from cash reserves or from borrowing. And so I look forward to having that discussion as well, and I'm sure staff is preparing itself to present options to us. I had talked about the options for this building, and Vice Mayor Freiling brought up, what is it that we ask of people coming in and bidding. And I noticed here in the Stryker Center concept, it says the project will replace the existing Stryker building. So I think in saying that, what we're saying is we're looking to demolish and rebuild. And so maybe if we can edit that to reflect that here's an option for a design team to come back with an option to renovate if they so see fit.
I think that's consistent with the discussion.
Yeah. To use a Michelle DeWitt buzzword, it's adaptive reuse. Keep that option open.
And so I just think it's when we go forward, communicating with other developers or builders, that we make it clear that they have that option.
Okay. Any questions for us on either of those?
Not right now.
Pretty clear? Okay, I'm sure there will be. Okay, any further new business to come before council? If not, our next order of business is schedule of meetings for February. Jack, anything?
Nothing in particular at the point.
That brings us to our final agenda item, which is open forum, time when anybody who wishes to address council on any issue, you may do so. If you wish to address council, please come forward, state your name and address. Not seeing any. I think we have a closed session. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Multitask.
I do, but it's always nice to have the paper. It's comforting. Mr. Mayor, I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments and one legal matter per subparagraph 7 for the purpose of legal case files.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
We'll take a 5-minute recess and